are seeing this attack against trans people, and we are seeing an attack against LGBTQ educators really ramp up. And we are seeing this attack expand past even just the educators, the teachers who dare to teach like gender to children. We are seeing this now completely move beyond that into, I mentioned earlier at the top of the show, there is currently a literally hate campaign with death threats being sent to the Boston Children's Hospital. And last I checked, apparently the Department of Justice up there is like the prosecutors up there are looking into this. This is now well beyond just like internet threats. This is serious shit, because literally the Boston Children's Hospital put out a statement saying that specific doctors are being threatened, and they're finding phone numbers, and there are all sorts of hate and all this stuff coming at individuals who work for this hospital, who literally take care of kids. It's the Children's Hospital, for God's sakes. And then today I see that libs of TikTok and Matt Walsh and all these people who foment this hate campaign are now expanding who they're going after. There's different children's hospitals they're now going after that isn't just the Boston Children's Hospital. So this is going to continue, obviously. And I think it's important to note that this isn't like just happening within like the conservative online vacuum. This is really getting really bad. And I think this clip from, who is this again, Matt? This is the Missouri GOP. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. Rowden, the Missouri GOP Senate Majority Leader. I forget what his Caleb Rowden. Caleb Rowden is his name.
Yeah. Let's listen to him and what he has to say about what their priorities are.
And just some extra context right before I play this, Lauren Burkhart said this. Missouri has a bunch of schools that have dropped down to 4 days a week because they don't have enough teachers. Dropped bus services, Medicaid, wait times are astronomical, bridges are crumbling, poverty is in abundance, and this is the priorities for the Senate in Missouri.
So let me ask you this. You said a productive session for the future kids. What does a productive session look like?
Well, I think it's coming in and starting early, getting our feet under us early. I think we're going to do some big stuff. We had some stuff outlying at the end of last year that we wanted to get done that we couldn't. The map clearly just took up a bunch of bandwidth last year. Mm-hmm. We're going to deal with curriculum accountability and CRT. We're going to deal with the transgender issue. Those are two issues that we know that 60-70% of Missourians agree with us on. That's just the way that it is.
I mean, this is literally the priorities. This is what they're going to focus on. Also, I like how he said the trans issue. How is it an issue? Who is it an issue for? Who is it an issue for? Like trans people who are seeking transgender healthcare?
Yeah,
that's who it's an issue for.
Honestly, like it's a little bit inflammatory, but they say the trans issue the same way Nazis said the Jewish question.
That is absolutely perfect. It really is. It really is just like that. I mean,
it absolutely is.
Yeah,
because that's what they're, but that's been their goal for decades. Honestly, I think, you said at the top of this, and it's true that there's been obvious escalation in the, amount of legislation being pushed that is actively making it more or less illegal to be trans. But, for decades, we've had people on the ground, activists in these communities telling us how bad it's been. And there's been a concerted effort, not necessarily amongst leftist media, obviously, but amongst the larger media sphere and amongst people who don't necessarily exist in those locations to pretend as though we've been moving in the right direction because a handful of cities that they are occupying this country will have a pride parade that isn't like firebombed now. And it's just not the case that as a country, we've been moving in the right direction when it comes to the rights and protecting the rights of marginalized people, especially the LGBTQ community, especially trans people. And so, I think it's a cautionary tale. Like we're now fighting a battle that a lot of people, or maybe not everybody, but certainly some people thought we had already solved not just the rights of trans people to transition, but also Roe v. Wade. And it should be a cautionary tale moving to the future about like letting, yourself be convinced by Democrats that just because the problem is out of sight for you, that it's eventually just going to become extinct because people are just naturally getting better. The more you see representation on television and in Marvel movies, the more it's going to reflect in your real life. And that's just not like, it just doesn't map that way. It's not what we've seen. And so, I would just say that this is a good example of why you can't necessarily look to the social diversity of a very specific hierarchy of people as a general like example of how as a society we've become more egalitarian.
Right. And of course they throw in CRT there. I mean, weird because I think CRT is sort of falling out of favor in terms of right-wing issues to focus on because they're having so much fun attacking trans people that they're focusing all their energy on that.
Yeah, but I mean, both issues really aimed at particularly teachers' unions, and like the "Don't Say Gay" stuff. Like you have to move down to 4 days a week for school because you don't have enough teachers, and now you're talking about CRT as the problem with your curriculum. I mean, this is. I mean, it's like it's a fascist attack on our country's intellectual development, and it's super despicable because. And the other thing is. They do the CRT stuff. I listened to Stitt, the guy from Oklahoma, on Dave Rubin's show the other day, and they talk about how it's actually this is all trying to unstick something they don't like being stuck, which is that people in rural communities like their public schools because they understand that that's the only way that they have an institution like that in rural areas because the private market is not going to provide for schools in small towns, and so these are all. These sort of issues, the CRT and the groomer stuff, is meant to try to attack the perception of public schools, particularly for those folks, so they can go privatize it.
Right.
No, absolutely. And schools had already, especially the teachers union, had already been villainized during the pandemic for being one of the sole like voices of rationality when it came to forcing children back into underventilated schools. And so a lot of the suburban class of voters, a lot of the Democratic Party also viewed the teacher union in a new light of being, not that they needed a lot of help because the idea of unions had already been being villainized in our society. But with the pandemic and teachers standing in stark, at least in their heads, opposition to like what parents want and getting kids back to school, a lot of people found themselves even more amenable to arguments about like teachers unions being too powerful than they were before the pandemic, i.e. the Chicago teachers union going on strike and people, commenting on it like assholes.
Yeah, I mean, I really don't understand.
They're letting veterans teach in Florida now.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that. That was an open call from DeSantis himself to do that. I really don't understand what it's going to take for Democrats and liberals and really the any sort of body agency that can do something about this to do something. This is getting beyond the pale. This is no longer just words. This is an attack on people's human rights. I mean, I just can't get over what we're seeing right now with the anti-trans hatred, and obviously this goes after teachers too. But I mean, it's just I can't get over what we're seeing with the children's hospital stuff. It's just I don't know what to say. Like I'm at a loss for words. Really, I can't believe this is where we are.
I mean, I think I can believe it's where we are, but I do think it's going to, one thing I see happening in the short-term future, not to make predictions, is a lot more Alex Jones-esque lawsuits by people who can afford to, actually file these lawsuits, like the Boston Children's Hospital against, people who are stoking stochastic terrorism online, where previously people were not taking that step. I think, a lot of victims are going to be emboldened by seeing, ruling in a favor of the plaintiff as opposed to like just some sort of blind free speech absolutist argument taking place in the courtroom, where there are some cut and dry cases of just like, you're stoking stochastic terrorism, you're clearly trying to incite violence against an organization or an individual, and obviously the law has not been very aggressive in preventing that when it's when it's right-wing violence against left-wingers or against marginalized groups. But that doesn't necessarily preclude people from getting taken into court on civil charges.
Right. Yeah, hopefully, but unfortunately, I think how many of them are as wealthy as Alex Jones? Like, I don't know how much Libs of TikTok is making.
No, but I would encourage any social media platform to remove people like that and Matt Walsh from their platform.
Yes, that's the least they can do. Yes,
the idea that that's going to be the history of these social media platforms if they just allow this and all this sort of fluff about, oh, what about free speech, slippery slope shit. Nah, you're going to be hosting the cultivation of hate on a mass scale that is almost unprecedented you have to go back to like the 30s and stuff like that to talk about the way this technology is being deployed.
But you know what? That slippery slope thing is bullshit because clearly there's something different that libs. Let's even talk about this specifically. This very specific instance of how this is playing out with like libs of TikTok and like Matt Walsh and these anti-trans accounts online. Like there have been cringe accounts for years now that steal that rip stuff from like TikTok or Tumblr and mock the people in those videos, like social justice warriors and stuff. And the mockery happens online. They make fun of the person. Maybe the person will get some like replies, public replies on their platform, but that's as far as it goes. And the cringe account moves on to the next person to just laugh at. This is obviously something more with an account like Libs of TikTok, when every time this account decides to focus on somebody, this person is tormented, harassed, has to move from their home, loses their job. When their lives are upheaved, there's clearly something different here. Because this account isn't just like, and the right loves to do this to defend Libs of TikTok. Haya Right Chick is her name. They love to say, oh, she just reposts what other people post. No, I just said cringe accounts have done that for years without any real, blowback like we've seen. She explicitly puts out calls to action to her followers to do something about this. And it's not just, haha, look at this liberal idiot or SJ Dub. It is, this person is a demon, satanic, and they'll do this to your children too. We must do something about this. There is a clear difference between the two things. And if Facebook and Twitter and TikTok and whoever else is involved with giving, Substack is a big one right now where Libs of TikTok runs to do her more incendiary stuff because she knows they'll give cover to her. If these platforms are happy to have this sort of material on their website, they should know exactly what it is they're taking part in and where their place in history will be. And unfortunately, I think for some of these platforms, we're at the point where it's like the QAnon thing, where QAnon started in 2017 and quickly moved to these platforms by 2018, and they did nothing about it until like summer of 2020 when it started to get really out of hand. But you know what? By then it was too late. It already permeated everywhere. People already were able to find their like-minded conspiratorial buddies over on Telegram and other platforms like that. And I think we're at the point now where this is it too. I think it's too late. I think they could do something to help curb it, but we are beyond the point of no return now. Just like we were for QAnon in 2020, we're there now for Libs of TikTok, I think.
I mean, I agree with everything you just said, but just to jump back to the beginning, the idea that this is going to be a slippery slope that results in all free speech being abolished is just silly. Anyone who says that they're a liar or like financially incentivized to pretend that way because like this is how they make their money, or really stupid. But the reality is, I think the slippery slope has already happened, and that has been when that was when the fairness doctrine was basically just ripped up. And I think people are going to look at the past 30, 40 years of American media in the future, hopefully, if we make it to a future when we actually have like actual laws regarding like broadcasting, because the reality is like a lot of this stuff trickles down from the top. Like the online content creators who have further monetized being like a reactionary by leading people up to these fascisty conclusions, but never quite putting their foot over that line. They get that stuff from Fox News. They get that stuff from the Rush Limbaugh. They get that stuff from the highest levels, and they just strip away a lot of the fanciness and appeal to a lot more of the base base instincts of the people who otherwise would be watching that stuff. And so we've allowed this kind of content to be monetized. And that's why a lot of people's argument now is like, well, if it's monetized already, I don't see why I'm not allowed to make my money that way. And the reality is because like America exists in like a very terrible paradigm where like our media just has basically no responsibility to be factual. Half our newspapers don't even seem to fact check the information that goes in them, and people still defend them as like necessary to like a sort of freedom that only seems to exist to make those people who work there incredibly wealthy. And we just have a very, very like poorly maintained media culture. And like now what media literacy means is not, being able to like parse out an article. It means, you should read a lot of stuff and figure out which one of these people is lying to you. And that's your job. And we've sort of like foisted that off to the population. It's your job to figure out which article in the New York Times is true, which one's been fact checked, which one's been, edited, which one is a lie, which one is just being written because the person needs to make a paycheck this week. It's your job to figure all that stuff out. And frankly, it's not a functional media landscape for anyone to navigate. And certainly it just creates these figures who exist only to appeal to the worst aspects of our society and to make, use the context of, bigotry, the context of prejudice that exists within our society to make themselves rich while making things more dangerous for marginalized people who are already being not just victimized by interpersonal acts of terrorism, but just by structural racism, which of course they pretend doesn't exist. But, whether or not these platforms crack down on these types of accounts, I think depends on whether or not it hits them in the wallet, whether or not like they feel, like I said about, the civil cases against Alex Jones, whether or not they feel like that kind of stuff might eventually come back to bite them, and you might eventually have somebody sue a Twitter or Facebook or make some kind of allegation against Twitter or Facebook that they had a responsibility to prevent, their kid who was in the Boston hospital from being killed because some like radical far right guy or whatever shot it up. And, maybe they won't actually end up having to pay out the way Alex Jones did, maybe they will, but it certainly won't be good for their, their image. And that's what most of these businesses care about, their image.
Right. Apparently,
Because,
oh, go ahead.
Just one thing, like, I don't keep up with the libs of TikTok or any of that shit, but like, there's a new villain from the far right. There's a new type of racist online every week. And the argument is always the same thing, that like, if you don't defend the right of like this person's free speech, it's going to have a negative impact on the free speech of people who this person hates. And it's like the most patronizing, ridiculous argument that people make online, especially when you can just look around and see that the people that they are actively victimizing are, find themselves further fall into deprivation.
Well, you saw this with the Elon stuff, because when Elon said he was going to buy Twitter, a whole bunch of the worst type of people came back to the site and were like, pretty active for a while. And then when that's gone, they leave. And I think also like you get somebody like James Lindsay, or you kick these people off the platform and all their freaks have to go, be isolated on some other smaller platform, making money for some other Silicon Valley corporation.
Right.
Yeah. And, a lot of these people also get off on, like, Matt was saying, that their whole thing is pretending like they don't understand how things work. And, oh, my God, people are just reposting it. And what are you talking about? Blah, 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 blah. And when they get shuttled off to when they get shuttled off to Gab, or they get shuttled off to Truth Social, then they lose the ability to pretend that they're not like just bigots. Bigots playing a game with language to prevent any consequences, either social or material. But, maybe they only clamp down on a handful of these types of accounts. And I think that's way more likely than there being any kind of slippery slope where we end up with no free speech, is that like they just pick the worst offenders like Alex Jones, and you go, see, we do stuff here.